Talk Like an Egyptian, a podcast about ancient Egypt with Dr. Chris Naunton and Izzy Lawrence. In this episode, we talk about the famous Battle of Kadesh. Hello and welcome to Talk Like an Egyptian. I am Izzy Lawrence, and over there you'll notice it is Dr. Chris Naunton.
Hello, everyone.
He's with his mouth full. It's fine. Having an emergency snack.
No,
he's finished it. That's good.
He finished
That's
it,
good.
no, and it was broke.
Okay, well, there we go. We get up so early in the morning just to bring you ancient Egyptian news. And one of the biggest news events in ancient Egypt happens to be a particular battle, because we've discussed a lot about how pharaohs like to go and conquer things. I think Hatshepsut's, not her nephew, well, her stepson loved to conquer a few places, didn't he?
He did, yeah, he was good at that.
But we don't have many sort of records of the actual battles, but there is one battle in particular that we do have a lot of detail on. And I know this because when I was researching my book, there is my book.
Is that your book, The Cursed Tomb, Izzy?
That is my book, The Cursed Tomb. Yeah.
Really?
And although it's written for 9 to 12-year-olds, adults love it too. It's great. It's very historically accurate. And in this, I basically spent like a couple of days researching the Battle of Qadesh in order for it to be a throwaway line in this book. So about 2 years ago, I knew all about this. So we're going to see what Izzy can remember. But this happens during the reign of Ramesses II, doesn't it, Chris?
Yes, it does. And you're quite right that warfare, military conquest, is a big theme of the period of the New Kingdom, which is where we've been for most of this series. 18th and 19th and 20th dynasties. We've talked about Akhenaten and Nefertiti, end of the 18th dynasty. We talked a bit about Hatshepsut and Thutmose III earlier on in the 18th dynasty. We're now the other side of the change into the 19th dynasty. And basically, this is a, inverted commas, great period for Egypt because partly because it's really wealthy. And a large part of the reason why it's wealthy is because it's a highly centralized state, but it also taken control of people and territory and resources beyond its own borders. We can, in some ways, think of it as a great period. This was a time when Egypt went marauding around the world, taking people over, battering them over the head and taking their stuff, which is not great in all ways. So taking territory is a theme, maintaining territory is a theme, and every so often Egypt would bump up against a neighbor that was just as powerful and also had similar ambitions to control everything and control people and resources, which brought Egypt into conflict. And as you say, although we know this happened, we generally have not kind of very detailed, in some ways not terribly informative accounts of what actually happened. But the Battle of Kadesh, which comes early on in the very, very long reign of Ramesses II, is a really good example of one where we do have a sort of narrative account, albeit, the Egyptian account, being an Egyptian account, it's very biased. It does give us some sort of insight into what we can be confident actually happened for some of it.
You say it's biased, but still, I seem to remember. Anyway, we'll get to what happens in the battle later on. But it is biased, I know, but in a very, I thought, amusing enough to make a joke out of it in the book. But you'll find out why as we come to the end. So this is sort of like Ramesses II when he was hot, when he was young, when he was beautiful. It happens early on in his reign, doesn't it?
It does, around about year 5, and he reigns for decades, so it is very early on in his time,
Yeah, and I'm thinking, so year 5 Ramesses II's reign would be around like 1220, 12, 20, 30, that sort of time, maybe.
It depends on your chronology. If you think of his reign,
I place his first Hebsed in 1249. That's when I'm placing his Hebsed. So that's his 30-year, let's test if you're still a pharaoh thing.
Yeah.
So from Izzy's perspective, 1249 minus 30 is 1219, plus 5 would be 1224.
Have you gone the wrong way there?
Oh gosh,
If
have
his,
I? Yes, no, I have.
yeah.
This is why I hate counting down. It's annoying. Okay, so yeah, I have. So it's 1279.
So that's more like it. Yeah, that's more like it.
BC
So,
makes no sense.
yeah. So if
BC
his
is just
Hebsed
terrible.
is in 1249, or let's call it
Yeah.
for ease of calculation 1250, then 30
There you
years earlier
go.
than that is 1280.
About 1276.
Something like that. There's a higher or a lower chronology for the start of Ramesses the reign. So some people would have it in approximately 1290, other people would have it in approximately 1310. So if you split the difference, Ramesses comes to the throne, again, approximately 1300 BC. So year 5 would be a few years into what is the 13th century BC. Which makes it, approximately 3,300 years ago. For anybody at home, by the way, I know we talk about this a lot, but just in case we need to do it again, for anybody at home who's thinking, why are they so vague? We have to be on absolute dates, of course, because we simply don't know. And, our dates are based on highest regnal dates, what we call regnal counting, that kind of thing. So for me, actually, it's if anything, it's slightly more misleading when books and things say, the Battle of Qadesh took place on precisely this date and precisely this year, because actually that's based on one interpretation and there are others. So very approximately first few years of the 13th century BC.
I'm going back to the Maya people. They are better than we are in terms of dating stuff.
Yeah.
So they're really accurate to one specific point at the start of the fourth creation until 2012. That is all set out perfectly. And they were predicting, when there would be eclipses way into, thousands of years into the future, and pre-predicting them into the past thousands of years. So they are great. They're astronomically on point.
Extraordinary.
Christians, not so much. I think Islam's pretty good. Chinese, I'm not sure there's a period of the Chinese calendar which gets a bit dodgy as well. But the long count is the only decent timekeeping that I've actually found in terms of civilization, because we switched from the Julian to the Georgian, and then there's a missing 11 days somewhere as well. So, but yeah, so we know roughly when we are. So Ramses II, how old is he, do we reckon, at this point?
He can't be that old because he reigns for approximately 60 years, I think. Whereas in some cases we sort of deduce that pharaohs around that time, some of his immediate predecessors, for example, Horemheb, Ramesses I, who are all well-established non-royals by the time they come to the throne. They couldn't have been well-established if they hadn't already reached a certain age. And they all reigned for quite a short period of time, not more than 10 years in any case, any of those three cases. That is probably partly explained by the fact that they were already quite old, so they didn't have long left, as it turns out. Ramesses II, if we're right in thinking that he reigns for about 60 years, simply cannot have been already, say, 60, where, assuming he didn't live to 120. So he most probably came to the throne, let's say, in his 20s, something like that.
I think late teenager, maybe. I don't know. I always thought of him as being quite young, but fair enough. So he is there. He is wanting to invade this place called Kadesh. Why?
Kadesh is up in the sort of border territory and the eastern Mediterranean, around the borders of what is now Turkey, up in the sort of northern Mediterranean, and Syria, kind of north and east. That area in particular is an area that had been taken by the Egyptians. So Egypt, if we have the map of Egypt, if you like, in our minds, with the Nile Valley in the delta and the Mediterranean coast in the north, if you sort of follow the Nile on its journey from south to north, you're going sort of directly up the map, you reach the delta. If you do a right, as if to go along the Mediterranean coast, you sort of arrive at what's now Gaza. So the border into what is now Palestine and Israel is basically in the same position as the kind of northeastern border of Egypt in ancient times. And so everything up to that point is part of part of Egypt and always was.
And really along the coast as well. So we're talking mainly the coast. We're not talking down into the peninsula at all.
No, exactly. Yeah. So up along the eastern Mediterranean coast is not Egypt, and they're not Egyptian people. But at certain points in Egyptian history, the Egyptians take over, and the New Kingdom is a good example of this. So when Tutmosis III was marauding around, taking control of things, he was going up into that region, up into Palestine, Israel, Lebanon, and even slightly further beyond. And he was hugely successful. He's the most successful up to this point. So Kadesh is sort of at the northern extent of this region in very general terms. There is, by this point in the early 19th dynasty time for Ramesses II, another very powerful state called Hatti. We refer to the people as the Hittites, and they are based in what's now Turkey. So they're expanding from their base at Hattusa eastwards towards Qadesh. The Egyptians kind of northwards towards Qadesh, and Qadesh is at the frontier of the two. So basically, Egypt and its very powerful neighbor and rival Hatti, they both want to control this territory. It's kind of on the frontier, and this brings the two states into conflict, basically.
I'm wondering why this particular territory is so. Is it just because it's where they meet, or is it because because I know that you've got it's Cyprus, isn't it? That big island in the Mediterranean, which has all the copper on it, hence why it's called Cyprus. And then there's this sort of like the Silk Road sort of comes to a point, because it sort of crosses the land and it comes to a point here, and then there's the distribution into the Mediterranean around this sort of area. I'm talking very vague Bronze Age information that I have. So do not quote Anisi, but this is the understanding, the loose understanding I have. So that's why this land is particularly powerful, because it's basically a gateway to Europe, to the Mediterranean, and to North Africa, is all sort of coming, because you've got all the stuff from India and China, even though it's not an established route by any means like it was later on, but it is starting to get there. And so they sort of can come through that way. That was my understanding, but maybe I'm completely talking nonsense.
There may be that. I'm not particularly an expert in trade or movement of commodities, but in any case, more or less whenever the Egyptians do any conquering anywhere, this leads to large amounts of booty being carried off, often in the moment of conquest, but then also what they're doing is taxing these subject peoples from that point onwards. So so actually that's maybe an important point to make. It's not just that they go to these places and sort of go, marauding into temples and stealing all the precious metal. They may well do that, but it's then more that from that point onwards there is an agreement that we're in charge now, so you will be sending us whatever your useful stuff is. You'll be sending us in the form of tribute, which is essentially kind of taxation, because the Egyptians were bullies, if you want to put it like that, and went around saying, well, look, we're harder than you, and if you don't want us to come and destroy you. But
they're protecting you from other peoples, maybe. Is there a sort of level of government that they're leaving there as well? So that, because obviously there are pirates and there are law breakers, and you want to have somebody in control. So there is that sort of, well, you pay us and it's a nice little port you've got here. Wouldn't want anybody coming in smashing it up. We'll look after you. Give us a tribute. Is it that sort of sense as well?
They did leave a certain sort of amount of infrastructure around. So there are Egyptian inscriptions and there are Egyptian forts up in
the fort is what I'm thinking.
Yeah. So they would have stationed soldiers, it seems. I'm not aware of any clear evidence of an instance in which the Egyptians genuinely protected a local population from any nasty people, because that was the deal.
But I think it's implied, isn't it? If you've got a fort there and you've got people that you are taxing, you do not want somebody else to take all of their stuff, because then you can't tax them.
No, that's right. But that would be to do with the Egyptians protecting what they consider to be their own assets, I think.
Yeah, exactly. But that's kind of the justification for it as well. Maybe they don't need any justification for it. But what we know is that conquering at this point has got nothing to do with, oh, we want a change of government, or this is the religion you need to follow. It's almost entirely economic and national security, I suppose, in a sense, because you don't want people right up on your borders. You'd rather fight your battles on other people's territory in your colonies than you would, in Memphis.
We mentioned in the last episode about Hatshepsut, I think, that it's not entirely coincidental that in the early 18th dynasty there is all this marauding and invading on Egypt's part, particularly into this part of the world, because it is reversing a situation that Egypt had clearly not liked from the Second Intermediate period, where these groups of people, probably multiple groups of people from Canaan, from the sort of southern end of the Levant, essentially what's now Israel, came into Egypt, settled in the delta, in the parts of northeastern Egypt that are closest to these people's own homeland, settled there and took control of the delta region, but also started to take control of other parts of the country too. This was remembered in later times in the 18th dynasty as a horrible event, very, very bad. It was kind of very traumatic for Egypt. So when we see, and by the way, actually, this is a sort of slightly separate story, but so Egypt has been kind of attacked and taken over, if you like, from the north and east. We don't know so much about this, but it is also clear now that Egypt was also invaded from the south at the same time. And that the kingdom of Kush was nibbling away at and into Egyptian territory at the same time.
That explains why Ramses put up those massive statues of him along the Nile at the south to stop it. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Don't get distracted by me, Chris.
No. So you're right. So the first job of the line of kings, the 17th dynasty line, which is the rival to the invading foreigners from the south and north. Their first job is to kick those people out. And as I say, we don't know so much about what was going on in the south, and it may have been that it was just sort of isolated raids, whereas in the north, these foreigners have properly established themselves, capital city, the whole lot. So the first job for that line of kings, the 17th, which will become the 18th, is to kick those people out. But then they go further. They don't just sort of kick them out and then stop at the borders, but the Egyptian armies carry on into what was the Hyksos territory in the north and into the Kushite territory into the south. So yeah, I think you're right that a part of what's going on here is that they are ensuring that they are never going to be invaded again. They chase the invaders out and they go all the way into their territory to make sure that their own borders are secure. But I mean, I think you can also argue they went way further than that.
Because they can. But this isn't also...
Yeah, because they could, yeah.
But this isn't like a sort of like medieval or a modern war where it's all sort of justification of a religion or an ideology. I mean, we're not talking that, we have to overtake these people because the way they're living is just wrong. It's almost entirely economic and security.
Yeah, I mean, there may have been people involved on the Egyptian side who were so religious that was in their thinking, but no, I mean, it does seem to have been economic. And, and we do have actually very good records of Thutmose III's campaigning. So we know dates and we know where the armies were going and we know which city-states they took over. We also, it's extraordinary, they're known as the Annals of Thutmose III. They're inscribed on the walls of one of the sort of central parts of the Amun temple at Karnak. And they include these huge long lists, very detailed lists of the stuff that they took. And it's masses of lists of commodities of various kinds. So it's clear that, even though the whole thing will have been couched in terms of this being what Amun-Ra wanted, or whatever, or Amun-Ra having been at the side of the king, and blah blah blah, they're also very keen to let everybody know, well, we took this and we took 2,000 of those and we took 3,000 of those, So even at the time, the economic part of it was pretty obviously the most important part.
What I think might surprise people, I don't know, maybe it won't surprise people, but when you go into battle as Pharaoh, you go into battle as Pharaoh. I mean, this is the famous thing I find. If you've heard of the Battle of Kadesh, you've probably got an image of Ramesses II in a chariot, which I believe is a Hittite invention, which just seem a bit cheeky.
Horses and chariots come in, they're introduced to Egypt in the time of the Hyksos. Yeah, so it's not, up until the New Kingdom, it's not an Egyptian thing at all to have either horses or chariots, but it becomes, in the New Kingdom, one of the standard, classic images of Pharaoh is of Pharaoh in a chariot with a rearing horse, perhaps, drawing back an arrow in a bow. They have adopted. I don't know if we know where they were invented. Actually, I just don't know.
Okay.
As usual, answers
Do
on
you
a
know what?
postcard.
Do you know where
Complaints
I'm
on a
getting this
postcard.
from? Do you know where I'm getting this from? There's a board game called Civilizations where you basically start off and then you can basically buy different armies and that sort of thing. And some of them are Hittites, and the Hittites the first time you see chariots. So that's where I'm getting
right,
that from. You know, that really good historic.
Maybe.
But that's the impression I've been given. So
Don't
trust Dizzy Lawrence, guys.
But chariotry and warfare is another thing I don't know terribly well. But they come from the Egyptian perspective. They arrive in the time of the Hyksos, as far as
I know they had like a mesh floor to their chariots, I think, or there was some sort of mesh involved, because they'd have two people on the chariot. They'd have the person with the bow or the weapon at the back, and they'd have the person driving it at the front. But you usually had two people on a chariot because obviously you can't do a chariot and kill anyone, because you've got to control the horse.
I mean, we do. It's not something I know a great deal about, but it is possible to know quite a lot about chariots, in as much as we have lots of iconography, and when we have a number of actual chariots, mostly from the tomb of Tutankhamun, although those are, we think,
ceremonial.
Yeah, ceremonial only, exactly, gilded and covered in all sorts of exquisite decoration and inlays and that sort of thing. But I suppose we can assume that the basic form and construction of them is probably not too far away. And of course, people have done these wonderful reconstructions where they build one and then they have somebody drive one around a kind of horse riding sort of area to test for things like maneuverability and maximum speed and that kind of thing.
That's so fun.
Yeah,
experimental archaeology, they call it, which just seems to be like mucking about and having a great time, as far as I can see. But
very useful.
I've napped rocks. I've made woad. This is.
Oh, I think I might have done flint napping as an undergraduate. Yeah.
Yeah, it's annoying. It's not easy, and it's wasted afternoons with cold fingers, and you get whatever happens, you get a nick somewhere. Anyway. We're beyond that, because that's Neolithic. We're Bronze Age, prime Bronze Age, just before it all collapses. So the scene is, he's going up. Is he going up to defend, or is he going up to attack and claim more territory?
I suppose a little bit of sort of both. It's a contested area by this point, and it's right kind of on the frontier of the territory that these two empires want to control. So I'm not sure if we know what his ultimate aim was, but it was to claim Qadesh, to take it from Hatti. I think, if I remember rightly, it had kind of passed between the two of them on and off in the years running up to this. So this is the latest sort of episode in a longish kind of running saga of claims for this part of the world.
Do we know anything about the size of his army? I mean, what are we talking about? Are we talking about a little band of brothers, or are we talking about thousands of people? Do we know?
We're probably talking about it's four divisions. We know this. We're probably talking about thousands, I think, of soldiers, and then of course some of those would be infantry, some of those would be chariotry. We have a whole series of incredible images of the battle, illustrations, if you like, which accompany the long text that gives us all of our information. And these show things like the Egyptian camp, which gives us a sense of some of the things that came with this I mean, it was a massive expedition. Yeah, so certainly not just a few crack commando soldiers or whatever. No, it's a big deal. Yeah, with a camp, and the king brings his pets, and you can imagine that there's a whole sort of support staff along with the soldiers and that sort of thing.
Well, this is it. I mean, these armies there'd have been more people not fighting, supporting the army than fighting, I think is, well, it's certainly, I don't know about the Egyptians, but certainly in terms of, if we look at Xerxes and, a bit later on, when Herodotus says, oh, he had 1 million people in his army, what people, you giggle, but some people take that seriously, that number, and what they think is it's the support.
1 million?
A
Really?
million people, but the
Seems,
necessary support of a medieval, well, even a medieval army, but even you need people to feed everything, clean, cook, set up the camp, all of it.
Yeah.
It's a lot more than the actual fighters and a lot more that you can think of, so it's not, even Romans would have servi coming along with them to actually, do everything. So it's not just like a load of guys with really like tiny little bits of equipment and their little pouches they can eat food out of. They've got to provide for themselves.
No, exactly. No, it's a big deal. Yeah, it's a big deal. I mean, it's a long way away as well. I mean, apart from anything else, I suppose if you think this through, if a battle was going to take place 20 miles away from where you've got a garrison stationed, then you probably could send a group out. They'd get to 20 miles away potentially in a day, I suppose, depending on terrain and conditions and that kind of thing. This is a whole heck of a lot further than that. It's hundreds and hundreds of miles away from Egypt and from the capital at Ramesses. So you've got to be jolly well got to be taking a lot of stuff. So an interesting point actually as well. Sorry, maybe this is a digression, but the king is there. The king doesn't necessarily have to be there, and if anything, you might think that's not a terribly good idea. But the king is.
Well, he's got to sort the Nile. So what's he doing there? This is.
Yeah, well, exactly. Yeah, I mean, it's not like he hasn't got other stuff to do.
He's got a point to prove.
Well, perhaps, yeah, perhaps.
Let's get into what happens. Tell me the story. Let's do the story now. Enough preamble.
This is, well, as we've already said, this is one of the best documented events, I think, in the ancient world.
There's a touring exhibition about it in the British Museum, which actually had the reliefs on the wall. And then what they did, in order to tell you the story, they highlighted different parts of the relief to show you how it went. I think.
Oh, right.
I'm pretty sure that happened. I'm pretty sure it's this battle. I'm now going, oh crap, was that Akkadians? Actually, that must have been Ashurbanipal. Shut up. Cut that bit. That's fine.
There was an exhibition on Ashurbanipal, yeah.
I think it might have been Ashurbanipal. I'm going to shut up.
But we could do that in a different episode. And that's a good story. That's a great story.
But he's not Egyptian, so...
No, but he part of one of the reliefs. We're really now on a tangent. One of the reliefs shows Egypt. Yeah, he was in Egypt, in Memphis, battling against Cush,
and people on camels. Let's just go with the story. So he gets to the frontier.
So we know about all of this from the fact that Ramesses set up afterwards in a number of temples. These texts, there are two versions of the text, a kind of longer form and a shorter form, and then these great illustrations of the text, if you want to see it that way, these great sort of tableaus of reliefs, kind of bio-tapestry kind of thing, with lots of different episodes and scenes going in what looks like a whole big sort of blur of things happening all at once. And the way the artists actually arrange these things on the wall is a little bit confusing, because you don't read things like a comic strip, sort of this, that happens, and you move along the wall and this happens. It's all kind of arranged in a strange way, but it is all there if you can kind of interpret it. And if you can read the text alongside, you can sort of see that where different parts of that huge scene illustrate different points. The king is on his way to Kadesh, and as I mentioned, there are 4 units of Egyptian soldiers, one of which, if I remember rightly, is in position. The others are on their way, including the one with the king in. And at a certain point, when they're all getting close, the Egyptian army encounters two nomads from these are Shasu people, and Shasu is a particular ethnic group, I suppose you would call them, from this region, and it's a migrating group, a nomadic group. But they apparently were in the service of, or they claim to know about what was going on with the Hittite armies, and what they tell the Egyptians is that the Hittite king is nowhere near. And in fact, he was too afraid of the Egyptian armies to come anywhere near to Kadesh. So they tell the Egyptians that no, they're miles away still. They're very fearful of you. But it turns out that, as the text makes clear, that this was dishonest.
Lying liars who lie.
Exactly. They're in the employ of the Hittite army. And in fact, what they were doing was attempting to assess the Egyptian position for the Hittites. And in fact, they were lying about the position of the Hittites as well, who were more or less right on top of Kadesh, ready and waiting. So the Egyptians are lulled into a false sense of security by this. This gives the Hittites, once they establish the Egyptians' position, this gives them the advantage, and it gives them the opportunity to charge. So the Hittites go smashing into.
It's the camp, isn't it?
They eventually get to the camp, but
Okay.
the
They
camp
get through the soldiers
is not
first.
completely staffed with a full complement of the Egyptian army. There's only one of these divisions already there. The others are on the way. So what they do is they, understanding the sort of direction, and I suppose you have to imagine that this is a very long sort of caravan, if you like, of soldiers and chariots and all those support staff. They're all in a long line, sort of stretched out across this territory in a line heading towards the Egyptian camp. So the Hittites come smashing through that long line, which of course throws everybody into chaos and confusion, breaks up this line. They then, it seems, go in as sort of, they take a kind of a turn, and then they start heading towards the Egyptian camp. So this is a disaster for the Egyptians, because the divisions that are still on the way are scattered everywhere, and the camp, which is understaffed, I suppose you might say, I'm sure there's probably a better word for it than that, is now very vulnerable to attack. So the Hittites kind of strike the first blow, and they get to the camp and they start scattering everybody everywhere, and this is a terrible disaster. And Ramesses II, who's in the midst of all of this, I mean, clearly, if we take the Egyptian text at face value, and actually, as we'll see in just a short while, we probably ought not to do that. But he's right in the thick of things, and his life is clearly in danger if we take things at face value.
So basically what you've got is you've got a situation where you've got a camp that's now been isolated from its supply lines. And as the army manages not just to attack the camp, but get inside like whatever fortification there has been, and is about to slaughter absolutely everybody inside. Which is the worst situation when you have the king there, who is also kind of a god that controls the Nile and that sort of stuff. So it's kind of like important that he lives. So does he do what like Emperor Nero did and just run away and play his fiddle, or does he man up and get on a chariot and start killing?
It's the latter. And this is really why this becomes such a big moment for Ramesses II, and the fact that the text and these images are carved onto the walls of what's now the front of the Luxor temple. What by this point is the new first pylon in front of the Luxor temple. It's in Ramesses' mortuary temple, the Ramesseum across the river. It's in the temple of Abu Simbel, which is that great one that you've mentioned a couple of times, which is set up in territory to the south of Egypt's border in Kush, as a way of sort of scaring the locals or intimidating the locals. It's put in all these strategic positions, and it, more than any other episode in Ramesses' life and reign, and there are other military campaigns, some of them also depicted here and there, but this seems to be the most important one. It's probably because of what apparently happens next. Ramesses essentially claims that his other soldiers are kind of falling about all around him and no good, and
Panic.
not really helping at all, panicking. Yeah, exactly. So it falls to Ramesses the second himself to do all of the work. It says, when His Majesty, I'm just reading from the text here, when His Majesty caught sight of them, he rose quickly and raged at them like his father Montu, the god. Taking up weapons and donning his armor, he was like Seth, another god, in the moment of his power. He mounted his horse, which was called Victory in Thebes. Bit of a clunky name, but anybody out there is expecting a child or anything, has a thought for you. Started out quickly, alone by himself. His Majesty was mighty, his heart stout. One could not stand before him. All the ground was ablaze with fire. He burned all the countries with his blast. His eyes were savage as he beheld them. His power flared like fire against them. He heeded not the foreign multitude. He regarded them as chaff. His Majesty charged into the force of the foe from Qadesh and the many countries with him. His Majesty was like Seth, great of strength, like Sekhmet in the moment of her rage. So drawing on, when we were talking about gods, all these the stories of all these gods and goddesses and the qualities that they have, and so this is a good moment for the authors of this text to sort of think of gods and powerful and strong and angry and vengeful and all that sort of thing. And essentially, what we're told is that Ramesses, to cut a long story short, on his own, charges at the Hittites, bloodthirsty and raging, and defeats them.
It does sound like he accidentally looked over an oil lamp, set his tent on fire. That made everybody panic a bit. And then he sort of got on his horse and ran into them as they were running away already. But that's great. Well done, him.
There's definitely a good Monty Python version of this, isn't there? When all that sort of thing happens. Yeah, exactly. Tries to flee on his horse and actually realize, oh God, I'm going straight towards them here.
But the fact that flames come from his eyes and everything's on fire, it's just like, yeah, no, you knocked over an oil lamp and panicked, didn't you? We've all done it. That's what it sounds like.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, the reason I sort of mock this slightly in The Cursed Tomb is because obviously this is a very important battle. And to be fair to him, he does survive it when he could have been captured, which would have been disastrous. So even if he does bravely run away, he bravely runs away and gets out of there alive, which is great for Egypt geopolitically. However, this isn't, it comes across, it's written everywhere. This is Egypt's great victory. But as Nuts, my main character, points out to Camwaset, he didn't exactly win, did he?
No. So in fact, having said at the start that we don't have another battle that's kind of better attested this early. It's the first point about when we have this much detail. And actually, in terms of things like the location of the two different armies, the Egyptian camp and the Hittite base, the text allows us to sort of be fairly precise about where they were in terms of the Egyptians, those second, third, and fourth divisions arriving at the camp. We can be reasonably confident of where they were. So we can be reasonably confident of the sort of journey made by the Hittite armies from their camp, smashing through the line of the procession of Egyptians towards the Egyptian camp, blah, blah, blah. So all of that's kind of interesting and good. Those illustrations are quite helpful as well in sort of giving us a bit of information about what's in the camp or that kind of thing. The geography as well, because Qadesh is partly surrounded by a river. There are canals leading off the river as well. All of this is all very helpful. This bit about Ramesses going off on his own, and actually I just found the bit of the text where he talks about his fellow soldiers. He said, "I attacked all the countries, I alone, for my infantry and my chariotry had deserted me. Not one of them stood looking back. As I live, as Ra loves me, as my father Atum favors me, everything that my majesty has told, I did it in truth, in the presence of my infantry and my chariotry." So he's sort of saying they were all rubbish, and they all sort of deserted me, and then they had to watch me on my own do this all stuff. And if you don't believe me, you can ask them. And it just doesn't seem plausible, does it, that this is really what happened, especially when you consider that, firstly, it's an essential part of the way that kingship and the kingship vis-a-vis, the Egyptian country, the nation, the people, works. That the king has to be victorious and he has to be personally triumphant. This is the clearest statement of that we have probably from anywhere in Egyptian history. But decorum and the rules, for want of a better way of putting it, demand that that's what the king does. For me, maybe I'm too cynical, it seems to me not unlikely that Ramesses is, we've already said he's quite young. It would have been part of the sort of training and expectation of a pharaoh that they would have been in some way involved in battle. It doesn't seem to me very likely that they would be personally at the forefront of everything here, or that they would necessarily be the best soldier, of the whole of the Egyptian army. There isn't anybody who's sort of more capable and better trained and, for want of a better way of putting it, harder than the king. We don't know. But that seems likely that there are other contenders there. And it seems to me just as likely that, back to the kind of Monty Python version of events, that actually this may be totally made up. He may even have panicked, wanted to run, started crying, given up, said, well, I think we should surrender.
I wouldn't have blamed him.
No, exactly. All of those things would actually have been quite sensible. But you can well imagine that somebody among his retinue, or even months later, at the point at which they're starting to say, okay, guys, we need a record of this, and somebody says, well, you better write down that the king panicked and he tried to run away, and we told him, no, mate, you better stay here because I think there's a chance we'll be able to at least fight back a little bit. And somebody starts saying, yeah, do you know what? Okay, there's no way we can put he panicked and have a picture of him sort of, with his hands over his face, exactly, crying in his tent. We can't put that on the temple. We better put something else. And then, anybody who wants to curry favor with the king, and there would have been plenty of those people, start conjuring up this narrative in which, all of the truth of it is buried, and they come up with this counter narrative.
What I reckon happens, or it was probably more of a middle ground. I don't know at all, but there could have been a situation where the camp was overrun, and it was a case that they'd been caught unawares. They didn't have the supplies coming through because obviously that was, and so they're kind of in a under siege. Some men, not everybody, but some men do break in, and they manage to get to the king's tent or wherever he's staying, and they do enter his tent, and he does confront them. He might not actually hit them, he might not, get on his chariot or do anything, but there is a sort of sense that once you're face to face with an enemy like that, that's a big deal, even if you don't actually fight them. And to keep your cool and hold your ground, and not to cower or give up, and not let yourself get stabbed. What if he was very young, very excited, and the place was under siege, and he was like, no, I'm going to do this, I'm getting my stuff together and I want to prove myself, and everybody's trying to stop him. And as he comes out the tent going, I'm going to get them, that's the point they actually start to overpower and the enemy starts to run away. It's going to look to him like he was so mighty and terrifying that, and they just spent the entire time trying to keep him contained because he was so keen to go out there and murder people. And they've just said, no, we need the head of state alive, otherwise we're going to be complete. I mean, even in not a political sense, if you're a general and you're alive and your pharaoh isn't, oh dear, So keeping him alive is probably more important to them than almost anything else.
Yeah.
Maybe taking a long time to put that armor on, Your Majesty, while we just deal with this slighter problem.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, in Ramesses' defense as well, actually, I mean, here's somebody who has spent his entire life with people telling him how wonderful he is and that, he's in charge. And I mean, we see this today, don't we? Every so often you'll get somebody who is just told they're wonderful the whole time and, told you can have whatever you want. And they become completely delusional about themselves, completely divorced from reality. And I mean, actually, it's difficult to imagine anybody being more divorced from reality than a pharaoh, in the Egyptian court, being told they're God, essentially, and, all this sort of stuff. So very easy for everybody, all collectively, to conjure up a story like this, however well-grounded in truth or otherwise.
I think because of his upbringing, I don't think he would have been that fearful, because I just don't think it would have crossed his head that he could be murdered.
No, although if you're in a camp hundreds of miles away from home with a whole load of terrifying foreigners,
Yeah, who knows? But it's also, this is a story about, which is amazing to me, about them losing, or at least drawing. Like, literally, they've gone to
yeah,
this place to defeat this army, and ultimately what happens is they go home. I mean, it's not this great victory. The great victory is we kept the pharaoh alive despite having mucked up entirely.
no, exactly. There is something that's a bit tricky to explain about all of that. A few years later, and we mentioned that there are these other campaigns that are depicted elsewhere in temples, but Kadesh does seem to be the main one. A few years later, Ramesses manages to capture another couple of Hittite cities, Dapur and Tunip. We don't know where Dapur was, but it's in this same approximate region. Tunip is north of Kadesh, so that kind of suggests that by this point, at least, the Egyptians were in control of that general region and possibly also of Kadesh by that time. But it doesn't take very long for the region to return to Hittite control. Again, this is just a few years after the Battle of Kadesh. There never is a point at which either side finally definitively takes control of that region, and that's the end of it, and they then have it forever. It sort of passes between the two, and eventually, of course, some years after this, we get what is celebrated as the first peace treaty in history. Both sides agree to sort of to a peace between the two, and not to contest this region anymore. And we have that treaty. What's partly sort of wonderful about this is that we have Egyptian copies of that, but we also have Hittite copies of that. So the Egyptian written in Egyptian and set up on temple walls in Egypt, including in Karnak. But then we've got cuneiform versions of the text from the Hittite side, which have survived in the form of clay tablets. I had the chance to see one of them in the Museum of Archaeology in Istanbul a few years ago. So all of this, we're sort of working backwards, suggests to us that Kadesh was not the glorious triumph that the Egyptians might have wanted to portray it as, but actually it was more like a draw, perhaps.
Well, it was basically, it's a case of, hey, guess what, guys? We got tricked by some people, and then loads of our people died. Our king nearly got killed, but fortunately we made it out of there. That is kind of the story that's being told.
Yeah. Yes.
But maybe,
yeah, exactly.
which makes me think that maybe because it's not this great, like, but it's being celebrated, is how rare it was for the pharaoh actually to see any action at all. And so maybe his life was in danger for a short period of time. And maybe this is actually quite a big deal for that reason, that we've actually got a hero who didn't cower and fall away, who did, probably not set fire to the place with his eyes and was the only man slaughtering everyone. But maybe he did actually, fight alongside of his men for a little bit before the army could be defeated.
Probably the best reason for thinking that there might be some truth actually in Ramesses having taken a personal role in this is that it would have probably, you'd think, been much easier just to have quietly forgotten about the whole thing if it was in fact just that the Hittites caught the Egyptians out and very nearly routed them, and the Egyptians got away with it. It would have been much easier just to have kept quiet. Instead, they go completely the other direction, try and turn this into a glorious triumph, more so than any other battle in Egyptian history. So why do that unless actually there really genuinely was something in it for Ramesses II, some sort of personal, moment of glory. So maybe he was really more involved than cynics might like to suggest.
Like us.
Me included.
Exactly. Well, we're going to go off and we're probably going to discuss a little bit more about this, other theories perhaps. I don't know what we're going to do in this bonus episode, Chris. It's going to be exciting. So if you want to,
Sure.
I might read a page from my cursed tomb. Who knows?
Yeah,
That's
why
going
not?
to put people off, isn't it? That'd be awful. But if you want to support us and get extra content, please go to talklikeanegyptian.com or patreon.com/talklikeanegyptian, or just, I think if you're listening to this on Spotify or something, you can just, the bonus episode should be up, so you just click that and go, I'd like to listen to some more of this, please. Not that you sound like that. You probably have a very, very good voice. But we better say goodbye in a very peaceful way.
Yes.
In a very
yes.
Vulcan rational way that's also very ancient Egyptian. So after 3, Chris.
Yes.
1, 2, 3.
Yep.
Life,
prosperity,
and health.
Thanks for listening to Talk Like an Egyptian. To support the podcast and ensure another series, join us on patreon.com/Talk Like an Egyptian and unlock bonus content. Get in touch, talklikeanegyptianpod@gmail.com, or use the hashtag TLAE. We need your questions for the end of the series, so please don't hold back. Remember to leave us 5 stars of newts and share this episode with your friends. Find all links at talklikeanegyptian.com.